Welcome to this meeting of the Stronger Communities Select Committee. I think it would be a good idea if we started by introducing ourselves. I'm Jane Pratt, I'm chairman of this committee, and I represent Llanelli Hill Ward.
Hazel Eilert, Scrutiny Manager.
Wendy Barner, Democratic Services.
Mark Cleaver, Environmental Officer.
Sue Parkinson, Waste and Street Services, in Education and Awareness Officer for Recycling and Waste.
Roger Hoggins, Head of Operations.
David Jackman from the Crickhorny Environmental Group.
Maggie Collins from the Crickhorny Environmental Group.
Andrea Jackman, Crickhorny Environmental
Group.
Councillor Roger Harris, Christonan Ward, Abergavenny, a member of this committee.
Councillor Val Smith, member for Lambaddock Ward, member of the committee.
Linda Guppy, County Councillor for Roggett Ward, south of Monmouthshire.
Richard Roden, Councillor in Monmouth and member of this committee.
Councillor Laura Jones, Wisham Ward, member of this committee.
County Councillor Lisa Dimmock for the Elms Ward, ND, and member of the committee.
Gareth Walters, Public Protection.
Dave Jones, Public Protection, mainly here for the public protection item, but obviously we do get involved with litter as well. Thank you.
Good morning, Anne Webb, member for Tintern and St Albans and a member of this committee.
Brian Strong, I'm here as an observer, I'm the member for Usk.
Councillor Tony Easton, Dewstoke Caldecott, member of this committee.
David Jones, member for the Crickhorny Ward and here to observe.
Thank you all very much indeed. And if I can just say that members have agreed in the pre-meeting that we bring forward the litter strategy, which was item number 6, that we bring that forward, and obviously we switch round with Usk in Bloom, and that's obviously we're delighted to see members of the Langford Crickhorny group with us today, and it would mean that you don't have to stay for the whole meeting if you don't want to. So if everybody's happy, we'll be switching those around. Can I have apologies for absence, please?
Everybody's here, so no apologies for absence.
Well, that's brilliant. Thank you. And any declarations of interest? So we'll take those as and when. And public open forum. Do we have any members of the public here? Yes. And delighted to see everybody again from the litter picking group. We did have a meeting with Councillor Jones in the summer, which was very productive. And, it's absolutely fantastic that you've come back again to see us. So I would very much like you to contribute. So I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for inviting us to address this select committee. A little bit of background. The environmental group in Llanfihangel Crickhorny was formed in 2009, and among our various activities, we have a large group of about 35 active litter pickers, covering around 70% of the roads and lanes around our community ward. Our mailing list of members is well over 100, and we have over 350 Facebook followers. Each year we collect between 350 and 400 bags of litter, mainly from the verges and roadsides. We keep in touch with Keep Wales Tidy on a regular basis, and they help us with the supply of litter picking equipment and insurance. But we see very little being done to address root causes and to prevent litter in the first place. Whilst it's difficult to measure and prove our effectiveness quantifiably, we do feel that we do a pretty good job in clearing the litter in and around our community, and I think most of the inhabitants of the area and visitors would also agree. However, we're becoming increasingly frustrated at the lack of effort and support from the County Council. As community-minded volunteers, we don't mind giving our time and energy to this worthwhile cause, However, we're beginning to feel that the relationship is a bit one-sided. The real cost of the litter problem is huge, both in financial and environmental terms, as demonstrated in documentaries such as Blue Planet 2. Furthermore, Monmouthshire contains many areas of beautiful rural countryside, including a large part of the national park, which deserves special attention in itself. Yet there's currently no prominent signage or information when you enter the park to ask visitors to help us maintain the natural beauty and tranquility of this place. We understand that budgets are limited and are being squeezed. We're not asking for large sums of money or resource, but we are asking for more support by way of action. The reality is that our volunteers are saving the council large amounts of money by providing our work for free, and as long as we're properly supported and listened to, then we'll probably continue to do so. Whether future generations will also be prepared or able to give their time and effort in this way remains to be seen. Please do not take us for granted. We need to see the council fulfilling its responsibilities, as defined by the Environmental Protection Act of 1990, which places duty on local authorities to keep its roads and land clean and litter-free. Importantly, you also need a measure of cleanliness, which includes rural areas. The current LEAMS measure does not do this effectively. Communities such as ours are therefore not included. We realise that resources are limited, so a targeted approach is the only way to reduce and prevent litter. You must not continue only to rely on volunteer litter pickers. Prevention is better than cure. Research shows that the worst offenders are generally smokers, and that's not just cigarette butts, but litter generally. Age range 16 to 24 years of age. Male gender, slightly more than female. People who lack a feeling of community pride, and people who believe that someone else will always clear up after them, whatever they do. Furthermore, most litter is in the following categories: smoking-related, fast food wrappers and cups, and convenience foods, typically sweets, snacks and drinks. So these are the areas we would like to see targeted by MCC. After a very useful meeting in August with Councillor Pratt and several officers, we're now pressing ahead with a new campaign of roadside signs and car stickers, which will be used throughout our patch. I'm pleased that MCC have also purchased 2 designs and plan to use them across the county. We've also received sponsorship for 4 litter bins, in addition to the ones we've paid for ourselves, to be placed in local litter hotspots. 2 businesses, McDonald's and Landmark Trust, have provided funding for these. Because yes, bins do work as long as they're placed in the right places, regularly checked and emptied, and supported with appropriate signage. But we still believe passionately that MCC can and must do more to help us. We'd like to repeat our request that the Council uses its authority and resources to deliver a more effective anti-litter strategy, to include education, aimed particularly at secondary schools and colleges, a publicity campaign to raise public awareness of the menace caused by littering and the cost to our environment, wardens and CSOs to be given powers and training to enforce fixed penalty notices for littering. Research confirms that enforcement and penalties must be part of any effective anti-litter campaign. To partner with local businesses to show a united front against litter, particularly fast food, convenience shops, supermarkets and service stations, and to introduce a measure of litter that's better than LEAMS, which includes rural areas such as ours. One final observation: the UK cost of litter is estimated to be around £850 million per annum. How much of this is in Monmouthshire? How much does MCC spend on addressing litter? And how much of this is on litter prevention rather than clearance or disposal after the event? I don't know the answer to these questions, but I travel regularly throughout England and Wales, and I can see that other counties are at least trying measures and initiatives to prevent litter. I don't see much of this in Monmouthshire at the moment. So I'd suggest that the actual expenditure on litter prevention measures is very, very low. And yet the real cost to our county is probably measured in millions. Hopefully today can be a turning point. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much indeed, David. And, you know, we are so grateful to the contribution that you're making, and you've raised some very important points, and I'm sure members will have questions. Before we move on, and what I'd like to do is to, first of all, ask Maggie and Andrea whether they wish to add anything to what's already been said.
No, not for me, thanks.
No, I don't have anything else at the moment. I totally agree with everything that David said.
Okay, fine. Well, I'll bring you in later on at the end, and you may have something else to add. And I think now if probably the best thing to do is to ask our officers to respond, and then I'll throw it open to questions from members. So, Sue, did you want to respond? Mark?
We've got a quick presentation, a very quick presentation to show where we've got to so far. I'm just going to run through our councillors. It's not death by PowerPoint. It is very quick, but just to explain where we are with the litter strategy before we go into.
That's brilliant, and this is really explaining how the collaborative work that you're doing. Okay, that's great. So we'll watch this first, members. Whilst Carl is setting that up, are there any preliminary questions, first of all, that any members would like to ask David following his address? Councillor Webb.
Very much. I agree with everything you said, obviously, and I'm sure the local member is really appreciative of being here. Just a couple of points. I'm on the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority. I'm just wondering if you could have a think to where you would think appropriate signage should be placed. I know it's on the main road. I know it's on the dual carriageway where they're doing all the roadworks, because I've actually said that this sign isn't clear and I've got it cleaned. And also on the other road from Abergavenny to Crickhowell, there's also a sign saying that you're entering the national park. Can you tell me where you'd like one if you have your a wish? Thank you.
Our issue isn't so much that there are no signs telling you that you're entering the national park. The issue is that they're not prominent enough, and they don't make it clear that special standards apply in national parks. So I think that's a bit of a missed opportunity. I mean, I'd love to think that, you know, anti-litter and good behaviour, if you like, by visitors applies throughout the whole county. But Monmouthshire does have a large area of the national park, which by law does have a special status. Yes. And if you visit other parts of the country and other parts of the world, you know, Yellowstone National Park, for instance, or Snowdonia, I was up there a few weeks ago, and it's very clear roadside when you are entering the park, and it's very clear that you are expected to behave better than perhaps you normally would. Now, I'm not saying that that would only change behaviour within the national park, but I think it's a missed opportunity, and that gives Monmouthshire could take that opportunity everywhere where a main road enters the national park. For us, in Llanfihangel-Crickhorny, we're right on the edge of the national park, so visitors come through our village. Many of them drive up the valley to Llantoni and up over the road, up over the top to Hay-on-Wye. And that is a real litter hotspot, that corridor, because there's so many visitors to Llantoni, to the Priory. Yeah.
I've driven this route quite often, and I haven't actually noticed a proliferation of litter.
Because we pick it.
Because we pick it. Just been out there that day. But you haven't answered my question about the sign. Where would you want the actual sign placed in Llanfihangel-Crickhorny if you have a national park sign that you're entering?
I think, and I think this is perhaps something we could talk about more as a group, but I think it would be on that valley road as you leave the village going up towards Llantoni. because that's where the majority of traffic goes. And we pick that route, so we know there's a lot of littering along there. Yeah, I have written to the National Park authorities and did receive a reply, but it hasn't really led anywhere so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. And I have to agree with you. I mean, I am the councillor that lives in the Brecon Beacons Park, my whole ward. And I don't know whether you saw recently, we had a clear up of the Cliddott Gorge. And one thing that I have asked for is signage. And it's so sad that we have to put these huge signs up, which is really, in such a beautiful spot. But sadly, we've got to try and deter this dreadful behaviour. And I think you've raised a very important point there. We do need to make people aware that they are in a national park, and we're very lucky to have these parks in our area, and I think signage is one of the big issues that we need to look at. Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I thought it was great. Obviously agree with everything you said. It is really worrying, and I can't understand in this day and age people still littering. It just makes my blood boil. I just want to excuse my ignorance. I've been to these places, but I've not noticed it because obviously I look after my own litter. But are there bins provided along these routes that you're talking about?
Only by us. I think you could drive the whole of that valley route up to Lantoni is 6 miles from our village. The only bins, at the moment, I don't think there are any along that valley route. But we are planning to provide 1 or 2 in lay-bys and litter hotspots, as we call them. But compared to Herefordshire, as an example, the number of bins in Monmouthshire is dire. And yes, it's a matter of debate as to whether they work and are an effective deterrent. But I think the research generally shows that as long as they're placed in the right locations with the right signage, and emptied promptly. That's the key. Now, in our case, our volunteers, we never put a bin in an area where we haven't got a volunteer who will empty it regularly. We'll monitor it, empty it. They need to be transparent so that you can easily see if they're empty. No good having a dark black plastic bin that you can't see when it's filling up. You should be able to drive past a litter bin and very quickly see if it's half full or a third full, and that saves resource and makes it more efficient when you do come to empty them. So our volunteers monitor them, but that's not a sustainable solution for the county.
Yes, I was just about to say that's not a sustainable solution. And who's paying for those? You say you're providing them. Surely that's something that we should be doing.
Well, we've managed to get the first 4 bins we paid for as a group ourselves. We raise money through various activities as a group. We don't rely on grants at all. We don't believe that's sustainable either. So we decided to try to prove the case of whether bins worked or not. So we provided the first 4, and then we went to McDonald's, because when McDonald's in Abergavenny opened, we saw an increase, a significant increase in litter from them. To give them their due, they agreed to pay for 3 more bins. And then the Landmark Trust property at Llwynkellen, when we saw there was a build-up of litter from contractors and visitors near there, they agreed to fund 1 as well.
Thank you very much. If I can ask at this point, Head of Operations, Roger, if you could come in and just explain our situation concerning these bins as a council and the provision of bins.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We do provide bins. I'm very familiar with the valley. I don't remember the bins up there or whether there are any up there, quite frankly. We do provide bins when we're requested to do so. That being said, there's a school of thought that things by putting bins there, you actually promote litter being, rather than being taken home, you promote it being placed in the bin. And there is another school of thought which suggests that by doing so, you may get fly tipping around the bin anyway, because they know it's going to get emptied at some point. So we'll put our rubbish by there and we know it'll be taken away. I can't offer you any expert opinion on which is right or which is wrong. The trunk roads, the dual carriageways and the A roads, they tend not to have bins on them because the trunk road took them away some years ago. They used to have them on there, but they did feel that they generated litter because people wouldn't take it home. And their view was by taking them away, people would be encouraged to take their litter home. It's a balance, isn't it, between what's right and what's wrong. Now, in the towns, in the urban areas, we put them there. There's quite a lot. I'm sure Sue or Mark may be able to talk more about whether we put them elsewhere. But in general, if we're approached, we will put them there. But we then have to empty them as well. And do they encourage litter alongside them? But that's my view from head of service. I don't know whether...
Okay, thank you
Sue
very
may
much.
wish to comment.
I think what we'll do now is we'll watch the presentation and then we'll take further questions. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me? Sorry, let me go through. Yeah, great. Okay. As I said, it's a very... Yeah. Okay. As I said, it's a very quick presentation to show us where we are now and how we've got to the point of a litter strategy. So the litter strategy came from response from our litter champions. We have a litter champion meeting every year. The inaugural one, the litter champion said, you don't have a strategy, we'd like to see a strategy. So that's where it came from. That's why we started to develop the litter strategy. As well as the Llanfair Angle group, we have roughly 150 litter champions across the county. So it's not just one group, it's many individuals and many groups supporting this. The draft strategy was developed, taken back to the litter group, the litter champion group in 2018. All of their comments were taken on board. Further development of the strategy. We raised litter at the members' workshop, and members asked us to go out and do some surveys to find out what the public's view are on a lot of the waste issues. We met with the Llanfair Angle group again in August 2000.
Sorry, Carl, to interrupt. Can people read that? Can you make it larger?
Yeah.
And also, in future, it might be helpful if anybody's got presentations to bring to this committee, if they let us have them in advance.
Yes, no
but
problem.
if you can make that larger, it would be helpful.
Chairman, can you put these two on here?
I think you'll have to read the main points out.
Okay, no problem. I will do. Yeah. So we've met with the group. We've decided that we're going to support some proactive campaigning in the Llanfair Angle Corney area to get some results to see if actually putting bins in lay-bys, doing some of this more promotional work actually reduces litter. So that's where we are currently. That's what we're doing with the Llanfair Angle group. The strategy sets out a whole array of issues and items that we want scrutiny to have a view on as well. Where do we focus our limited resources going forward? So when we spoke with the public, this is the public view. 1,700 responses, 1,700 responses to it. 1,607 said they would like a campaign to reduce litter. So that's what we asked them. Do you want a campaign to reduce litter? Yes, we do. Overwhelmingly. Should the council proactively issue fixed penalty notices for people littering? Overwhelmingly. Agreed. The council should support a national deposit return scheme to reduce litter. Relatively, still overwhelming, but slightly more people saying not 100% sure about that one. The national deposit return scheme is for where you take your plastic bottles and cans back to the shops and they give you money for them. So many people believe that will reduce litter by default because you're getting something back on those bottles. So the old milk bottle type scheme, but for money back, or pop bottles, depending on, depending on how old you are. Should the registered keeper of a vehicle be fined for throwing litter? We don't have that in Wales at the moment. We don't have that legislation, but it is in the UK. So more people disagreed. The overwhelming agree that it should be, but it's the first one of those questions where there's actually quite a strong disagreement with our view. Overall, the questionnaire was very long and very thing, all about waste and all about litter, but we saw a lot of things regarding litter and a lot of different messages. I'll make all this available to everyone so they can go through it. There's 32 slides. I'm not going to read them all. We've got 528 responses from the public, and all of those responses are on these sheets. You can read them all. Since McDonald's opened in Llanfoist, the littering on the Melin alongside the A442 trunk road has significantly increased. It's throughout the 528 responses, this is the kind of thing we get. Not everybody agrees with the campaign. Quite a few people said it's a waste of money because people don't listen anyway. Some people didn't agree with fixed penalty notices because they think it's pretty barbaric. Others completely agreed with fixed penalty notices. Others completely agreed with the campaign. But I'll make those available so members can read through them. From an officer's perspective, what we're here today is to go through the litter strategy to gauge your views on where we should be putting our focus. So that's the slide over of how we've got here, and now Mark is going to explain what the strategy contains and what we would like your views on.
Okay, thank you very much, Carl. And I would just stress once again, we do have very clear guidelines as to presentations coming to committee. And if we're going to have really effective meetings, we need to have this information in advance so that members can read it and come along prepared with all this detail. So it's a great shame that didn't happen in this case. Can we just go back to the, thank you, Carl, and there's some interesting points there. Can we just go back to the bin strategy? Because we haven't had an opportunity. Roger has responded. How do members feel about the response about bins? Do you feel it should be our responsibility as a council to provide bins? Do members have any thoughts on this? Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm also an Abergavenny town councillor, and we provide bins, and I think so does Llantillo Patholi Community Council. So there are other ways of providing bins. The important thing is making sure they get emptied. So we mustn't forget that there are other people that can participate if we have particular problems. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Guppy, could you turn your mic off, please? Yeah.
No, it was just to the question. I think where there's a bin, if there's proven research that if they're put in the right position it works, then it's sort of going to be so much beneficial. And I think maybe a request to the community councils if they could help provide some of these bins. I mean, I don't know if that's been done. I know the community councils are able, and it's sort of, maybe sharing finances and resources. And it may be that the county council can purchase them cheaper than the community councils themselves, which would obviously reduce, the cost really, but the benefits are huge for everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Guppy. I know certainly in my area, and I'm also a community councillor, we do provide some of the bins, and we also work with people like the canals and river trusts where we've got, so it needs to be quite a few different agencies working together. Councillor Eason.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a Caldicot Town Council as well, but within my ward, as Sue is aware, we provide dog bins for the whole of the area, and they cost a lot of money to manage. But I deal a lot with the local area manager, the supervisor in my ward, to look at where we want to put bins. And if there is any discriminate dumping rather than fly tipping, people not putting their rubbish out properly, there is a good arrangement with him to make sure that we try and keep the area clean. That's the only way as local members can do it, is to liaise with our officers to ensure that we can keep our bits and pieces tidy. When you go into the area in the countryside, yes, I think it's a different matter, and litter picking may be good there, yeah.
Thank you. I wonder, Carl, could you give us a little bit more information on the pilot that's happening in Clanverhangle, Crickhorny, concerning the notices and how we're going to monitor whether it changes behaviour?
Yeah, along with the Clanverhangle group, we've invested in some signages. There's going to be some Corex boards. We had this area's recently been litter picked by volunteer boards made up a few years ago. They work very well. These are Corex boards with the designs from Clanverhangle Crickhorny group. They're their own designs, anti-litter messaging. We've also purchased some of those designs for use on the council, which we're going to put on our new refuse vehicles when they come into play. So one of the things we're doing is quite strong messaging now in that area to see if it is an effective deterrent in this rural area. We have over 600 bins across the county. We empty them regularly. Whether we empty them regularly enough everywhere, that's something that we continually monitor and try and get better at. We work with all of the litter groups, but for the Clanverhangle group, they are going to monitor their areas to see if this is an effective measure. The Leams measure, as the group said, is specifically for town areas and doesn't really benefit the rural communities because it's measuring how clean our towns are, not how clean our county is. So I think working with the Clanverhangle group to see how well these things work in their area, which is predominantly rural, will give us an idea if we can roll out this across the county.
Thank you, Carl. If I can take now a question from Councillor Webb and then Councillor Laura Jones.
Just a question to Carl, thank you, Chairman. Is Clanverhangle Crickhorny particularly bad as regards to litter, or how does it compare with the rest of the rural areas, Carl?
In my own opinion, no, it's not particularly bad. That isn't to say for the people that live there, that are picking the litter up, yes, it probably is bad. I think they do a fantastic job in keeping it clean. From a county-wide perspective, Monmouthshire is not particularly bad litter compared to many other areas. What we are is very rural, and any litter shows up quite a lot. We have a lot of resource in our towns to pick up litter. We have limited resource to get out into the wider county. That's one of the things that the litter strategy wants to focus on, is where is our resources best spent to make the whole county clean. So.
Are you happy with that response, Councillor Webb? Councillor Jones?
Yes. All I can think about is for people that drop litter that it's pure laziness. So in my opinion, that people putting bins in strategic places if we work alongside 150 litter groups and community councils of where those bins could be best placed, I think we should get out as many bins as humanly possible. Obviously on our what resources we have, but I do think they would help with that, because when I see it, it's generally not the young people who we'd expect it to be. We blame everything on the youths these days. It's a lot to do with older generations that aren't as aware about the impact of dropping litter as maybe the young people are. Obviously, there's a lot of young people that do it out of laziness and things as well, but I think we're probably going to go into more education is needed and things. I mean, I know the junior school where my son is, are very good at sort of educating on picking up litter and things. But the secondary schools, I think, as you noted, are particularly bad at sort of getting that message across, and I think that's where the problems start, if they're going to start. We need to just make sure that message is hammered home, but I think generally young people are getting better because of the awareness and because of wonderful programmes, as you mentioned, on the BBC. that are making people realise that just their tiny bit of litter adds up. But I do think, as a deterrent, bins are the way forward. So we do need to look into providing more bins. I know in Usk Athletic Club, where my son plays football, I've noted there's a public footpath going across it, and it's notable where there's a bin, there's no problem. Where there's no bins, there's a lot of problem. And I don't know why people do it, whilst dog walking and things, but they do. If we provide those bins along that area, then they probably wouldn't do it. We wouldn't have the problem. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. If I can take Councillor Harris next, and
thank you, Madam
then
Chair.
Councillor Dimmock.
First of all, congratulations to your group there. You're obviously amazing, and you've got one or two at least persuasive people that have got you up to, what is it, 35, 40, plus hundreds of others. That is what is needed, is a small kernel of a driving force, and you should be used as consultants or hopefully be happy to disseminate your information, which I'm sure you are. But the bottom line, as far as I'm concerned, is that there is absolutely no excuse for litter. It's disgusting. Nobody would sit in their living room or on their drive and just say, right, I've finished this cigarette packet, I'll just throw it on the floor now, or on the drive. They just don't do it, but they're very happy to drive along in their cars and throw stuff out of the window. So it's just antisocial, and they know that there's going to be no comeback for them doing that. So it's about time we started getting nasty with them, to be perfectly honest. And the only way to get nasty with them is start hitting them in their pockets. And all the time we're not doing that, we're going to have this problem. They know they shouldn't be doing it, and anyone that doesn't know they shouldn't be doing it, well, there's no hope for them. So they need to be hit where it hurts them. That's the way I feel about it, and I advocate that at any possible opportunity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris, and you raised a very important issue there, and it was one that was discussed when we met back in August. And can I have our response, really? Have we looked at implementing sort of fines? And, I wouldn't want to... We do see some reports of councils in Wales where they do pay agencies to monitor and fine people, and it has got, they're actually monitored on, and I think, that their effectiveness, they get bonuses on how many fines they hand out. I wouldn't want to see that type of thing happening in our streets. But have we looked at this, Carl? Have we looked at how we're going to fine people?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chairman. This is, I think, a really ideal time for me to perhaps start discussing the strategy in a bit more detail, because what we've got is obviously a range of questions that are all coming, and many of those are unpicked within the strategy. There are actions that we're looking at, some things that we are doing, some things that we would like to do, and so if it's okay, I'd like to sort of address some of those in terms of introducing the strategy and how it's laid out, what's within it, and really it's an opportunity then, as Carl mentioned right at the beginning, to talk about that opportunity for you to give us that direction in those areas of actions that you'd like to present. So, if it's okay, if I can just sort of start.
Can I just, before you do, Mark, responding to the question, how many people have we had hit in the pocket, as Roger puts it?
In terms of littering, none so far, because we've only just got the transfer of powers to the county council is in process, so, and training people and that sort of.
Prior to that, did anybody hit her in the pocket before?
Chair, do you want me to respond? Because obviously litter enforcement rests with environmental health currently, and I think there will be a move obviously to work closely with waste going forward. Yeah, you are right. There's none so far in 1819. We did successfully get one in a van, would you believe? Because normally they say I'm not the owner, so it's really difficult evidentially. So the FPNs are very low. Fly tipping is very good. We've had 8 prosecutions in the last 4 years, £12,700 fines, and 250 hours for community service. So the fly tipping, where that's been particularly bad, which is perhaps more prevalent in terms of the rural areas, etc., we have tackled that. The FPNs is an issue. There is a capacity issue, which I know we'll be liaising with Waste colleagues on going forward, on the back of car parking enforcement. That will give us more capacity. The problem is now, Hugh Owen, that many of you will know, he trained up all the PCSOs to serve FPNs, and they haven't served any in the last few years. So that's a huge resource for Hugh, going out, training PCSOs up and down the county. That had no net effect because they got different priorities. So there is a struggle with capacity, and from our perspective, if we can work better with our waste colleagues in front of us, then clearly, if we can piggyback potentially the car parking enforcement issue that's coming across to us, then that will give us some helpful capacity to then do some FPNs with staff within. The third-party providers is very problematic, and this has come before members before. The issue there is that it's Mickey Mouse from Neverland, and the Magistrates Court get bunged up with non-payment of FPNs. So it's a real struggle, and I think that's perhaps one of the reasons the police avoided it. So currently, it does sit with Environmental Health, does sit with PCSOs, who've got powers as well. Very little FPN action, but that's a capacity issue which we're hoping to address through the litter strategy, which obviously talks about enforcement.
Thank you very much, Dave. Councillor Roger. Yes, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to put David's comment in context, the civil parking responsibility for parking, on-street parking, will transfer to Monmouthshire County Council in April of next year. So in other words, it no longer becomes a police issue. To manage that, we will require staff on the streets. So therefore, we're going to have staff who manage our off-street parking, our car parks, and manage on-street parking as well. At an officer level, we're just now investigating whether we should expand that role to include enforcement of other issues, such as enforcement, such as dog fouling, such as PSPOs. And so the actual role of that group, that team, will be broader. That won't necessarily give you any more, but it does mean that they can offer a more comprehensive service. That's a piece of work which is underway at the moment. We are meeting about extending that. The roles will be taken up. The team should be in place by April of next year. That's when the order transfers responsibility to ourselves from Gwent Police. So that's what we're doing, and that puts, I think, the comment which Dave made in context. So you'll see further about that.
Thank you. Did you want to come back? No. Can I just ask Mr. Jackman if he wants to come in here? Because when you came and met us in August, you had some very good figures on this particular area of, counties that do fine and those that don't. And I think we were at the bottom of the pile, weren't we?
Sorry, yes, absolutely. In fact, Monmouthshire, I think I'm right in saying, was the only county in Wales that hadn't issued any fixed penalty notices over a period of 3 years that I had stats for. Now, whether or not they work is a very interesting debate. There's lots of research on the topic. The conclusion of the research that I've read, and I think the strategy sort of supports this, is that to have an effective strategy against litter, enforcement and penalties have to be a part of that. How you do it, I personally don't think you need many examples to actually. It's not so much about the amount of money you raise from doing it. It's how you publicise the enforcement, the name and shame, the use of social media, the use of local papers. I've seen one or two things about the fly tipping, but you know, I've seen very little about fixed penalty notices in the papers or anybody being held up as an example of this is what happens if you break the rules. And you don't need many of those these days before the internet's awash with it. You know, the local environmental groups are spreading it and sharing it everywhere. I'd just like to see one or two of those. I realise it's unpopular with many people, as the survey supports there was some opposition to it, but that's still a tiny number. Most right-minded people want to see justice, applied where somebody does step out of line, and I think they support the need to do that.
Thank you very much, David. And if I can now bring in Councillor Jones.
Yes, you hit the nail on the head there. Sort of the policing of this is absolutely key, and the enforcement. You said in your presentation, prevention is better than cure, and it's a fantastic deterrent if we do have a few cases that people have been caught out and fined. If we can actually do that. So what Mr. Hoggins said, I found encouraging. If there could be some people out there actually enforcing it and policing it and keeping an eye on what's going on in the communities, that would be fantastic, because we can put whatever fixed penalty notice we want up, and it is a deterrent in a way, but if people are starting to be caught for it, it would put me off if I was that way inclined. You know, I think that's very encouraging, and it is the way forward. I think otherwise we're not going to stop people doing it.
Okay, Thank you, Councillor Jones. And if I can just to get the meeting back on track, ask Mark to continue with his presentation of the strategy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, I'm going to say thank you to David, Andrew and Maggie for coming today, for their ongoing work that they've been doing, you know, in their community, and obviously, in particular, supporting us in developing this strategy and encouraging us to develop this strategy, and for coming to and presenting to the committee today, because it's given us a real good context. What the strategy does is it lays out the context around litter, its causes and its solutions. And a key purpose is to provide everybody, internally and external stakeholders, with details of what we are doing to manage the issue. And many of the things that we've talked about already are, you know, the sorts of actions that, you know, we want to unpick and demonstrate how we're working on those particular areas. The strategy is laid out in thematic areas of work. It's to give clarity over how our actions are explicitly targeted at the causes of litter. And the litter, the types of litter that David identified earlier, cigarettes, cigarette-related litter, eating on the go, those sorts of things. And those types and causes of litter are have been identified by Keep Wales Tidy and other consultations. So it's about explicitly targeting actions at the types of litter and the causes of the litter. The action plan within the strategy includes aspects of our current work. So you will see elements of things that we do currently. So there's the work of our education team, including Sue, in terms of going into schools and having schools come out to the One Planet Centre. It includes replacement of litter bins and where we situate them. There's also a whole range of other actions in there which have come out of consultation, and also looking at other authorities or other places, other approaches to understand what actions can target these issues. So the action plan is really quite comprehensive in the things that we can do. It is important to recognise that the department doesn't have the resources to deliver all of the actions identified in the action plan. It's just not feasible. Rather, that what we're looking to do as a department is to deliver a balance of activities that, that meets those causes of litter, the types of litter, across prevention, management, and enforcement. So, importantly, as I think we've already discussed about, with the limitations of resources, some monitoring of that, so we can understand what actions are effective. And it's a very difficult thing to do, because obviously there are a whole range of sort of confounding or complementary things that are going on in society that complements towards the work we're doing. For instance, the Blue Planet programs that sort of changes people's perceptions. But as far as we can is to actually monitor what's happening, both in terms of our own service, but what's happening on the ground. So those thematic areas of work are there. Within the report, you'll see within the report that supports the strategy, you'll see an options appraisal, which kind of gives you a bit of an indication of the trade-offs that we've got to make. If I want, I'm going to pick a particular example because we've discussed it a little bit already, which is the issue around bins. Carl's already mentioned that we've got in excess of 600 bins. Well, if I suggest to you that an average lifespan of a sort of a street litter bin is around 15 years, it doesn't take a genius to work out that we should be working at around 40 replacement bins a year to get around 600 bins to replace them within their lifespan. A quality bin for the street costs around £400 plus installation. Well, if we take a £400 cost, it doesn't, and we're replacing potentially 40 bins a year at £400, we're getting in the region of £20,000 just to maintain our existing infrastructure without, looking at additional bins. That said, we also have to recognise that the existing infrastructure much of it is old and was put in at a different time. You'll see in the strategy issues around eating on the go. People don't, sit around cafes and eat their food. They take their food with them and they take their bottles. We also mentioned that eating on the go, particularly around people driving cars, throwing stuff out of windows. People are throwing stuff out of windows of cars. Yeah, they're not putting it in a bin, are they? It's not because they're not near a bin. And a lot of our bins were put in places many years ago when, in our parks and gardens where people stopped and had picnics and a bin was nearby. But because people are eating everywhere and anywhere at any time, they're not always going to be near a bin. And whilst we could put many, many bins out across the county, the reality is that many, many of those bins would spend most of their time empty. And that's where situating them in the right place is really, really important. And part of one of the options one of the areas in the strategy is to try and understand where the right place for the bins are, to make sure that if we do install bins and where we make that investment, it's made in the right place. And we are developing a tool to try and help us make that appraisal, so that when we get requests in for bins, we can look at that location in context to the sort of infrastructure that we have, and also to look at our existing bin sort of strategy. I don't want to go into the detail exactly, are we going to put a bin here or there today? That's something that we're working towards, and we want to work with the groups and we want to work with communities and understand our infrastructure. But these are the sorts of projects and actions that are in that strategy. So today, what we'd like from the committee is to consider the strategy both as a whole, in terms of the direction we're going and what we want to achieve, but also to give us a strong direction in regard to the weighting that we need to put on the action plan. Are we going to focus more on enforcement? Are we going to focus more on infrastructure? Are we going to focus more on education? And to some extent, are there areas within that specifically that you want us to really dedicate our resource? Because it is a limited resource and there will be some trade-offs. Inevitably, as projects can't all be delivered, what we do have is a whole wish list of projects that we can't deliver. And the good thing about having that wish list is that there will be funding opportunities, external funding opportunities, external support. The litter groups that are here and elsewhere in the county are keen to get involved, not just in picking up litter, but in other areas of our work to support us. And so there are opportunities to be able to, in advance, identify the important things that we need to do that are strategically aligned to deal with the issues that we've identified, so that they're ready. So when those opportunities come up, those external funding comes up, we've got something on the table, rather than be thinking, oh, there's some money available, where can we put it? So it's a much more proactive and positive response. Obviously, following your deliberations and your comments, we want to go away and return to the document and revise that plan, honing it to reflect the comments and recommendations prior to making it, to the next stage of adoption of the strategy. So obviously I recommend the strategy to you and am very keen to have your comments and feedbacks based on those points.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. And I think because of time is moving on, we need to focus our mind now on to those themes and the options appraisal, which starts on page 55. And there's 5 different themes there, and we really do need a steer from members as to it says there quite clearly options, benefits, risks and comments. And out of those 5 themes, you know, which ones should we be prioritising? So, Councillor Smith.
So scanning through, one thing that's not been referred to at all, and I find hugely offensive and extremely expensive and messy, chewing gum. There's no direct reference there, and I don't see why authorities can't start to chase the commercial producers so you get a biodegradable version. But I really cannot understand why we can't send a bill to Wrigley's or wherever they are as to how much it costs us to clean up our nice pavings and such like. Regarding bins, my own personal view, why should I be paying to clear up somebody else's rubbish? If they want to live in a pigsty, fine. Dropping zones around the roundabouts, aren't they, on the M4 where you're, or whatever the motorways, the roundabout, traffic slows. What comes into my ward is dropped by lazy people from vehicles. And I pay great tribute to the groups that work together, but also should remember that very many other people work individually and pick it up as well. But we are constrained financially. To see us pouring thousands and thousands into clearing up other people's rubbish, I don't find acceptable, and I'll go along with my colleague's theory. Pay up.
Thank you very much, Councillor Smith. Can we address this issue of chewing gum? How do we deal with this?
Yeah. Wrigley's and the other chewing gum producers have got a fund that you can apply for money. It is all around that behavioural change campaign. Some of the work that we will come out of the litter strategy is around that behavioural change stuff. So we will be applying for money from, I can't think of any other makers of chewing gums at the moment, Wrigley's and others, rather than just accuse Wrigley's of it. There are others available, yes.
Proposal, please, from this committee, the cost that we incur as a council clearing up that during the course of a year, you send that in total to those firms and let's see what comes back. Not just look for a grant from them, send them the bill.
Okay.
I think it's very difficult to identify where the chewing gum comes from. That's the problem, really. And there's so many places that you can buy chewing gum now, isn't there? I mean, sell it everywhere. Yes, yeah. If we can look at the appraisal strategy, and I think we need to take this one at a time, otherwise we're not going to get done. Councillor Jones?
Yes. I won't comment on exactly which one, but I do. You said what do we put preference on, and my preference would be on enforcement and infrastructure. I think in regard to education, and although these advertising campaigns are great, I think some of them, like the dog mess one, fall flat on their face, to be quite frank. And I think the way forward is maybe to do something like they did when I was in school many moons ago now, in junior school. And we did we encouraged schools to do posters about helping people to stop dropping litter. And I found that to be a very effective way of getting out to children. And then we put those posters up around the town, from what I remember. And I think it resonated with people more than just a standard poster from the council. If you see a child's actually saying, please don't do it because of this, that and the other, I found that a very effective way of doing it. And that would be for free then, rather than spending lots of money on that. I'd rather see that money put into more bins in the right places and working with our groups to find out where they are, for example. And then the enforcement, and as you said, investing in those people to do that extra job of actually catching these people out. Thanks.
Thank you. I think there's a general consensus that we need to enforce. Can I have a show of hands from members? Yes. Councillor Dimmock, did you want?
I'm usually loud enough that I don't need it. What partnership work are we doing with businesses? I used to work in a call centre as a manager, and our staff were 18 to 25, which, correct me if I'm wrong, is the sort of problem age group, yes? So education's great when you're teaching primary school. Kids hate impacting the environment. By the time they grow up, they care very little about it. So I think that's a bit of a waste of time and money. I think we need to be tackling the secondary schools, but I think more so the businesses. What are we doing with regards to that? And I know with regards to kebab shops, restaurants, they're under a duty of care under their licence, aren't they? So we're making them responsible for outside their premises. But I think businesses overall need to be tackled. I think they need to actually put the onus on their staff, you know, do the litter champion sort of thing, but on a adult platform, not a children's platform. Sorry.
We don't do an awful lot of work at the moment with businesses with regard to litter and waste, and we are aware it is something we should be doing more of, because I think it could be quite effective. Our trade team do quite a lot with businesses with regard to their waste put out at the wrong time, but when you come to things like packaging and the way it's disposed of by the customer, they tend to, you know, they sell the product to the customer, then it's the customer's responsibility to dispose of the litter that comes from it responsibly, and of course not everybody does. And when you have logos, you know, McDonald's or, you know, Greggs or whatever, you know, you can tell where a lot of the litter's coming from, and I'm sure the Kirkcaldy group see it all the time. There are certain outlets that come up over and over and over again. So yeah, I think that we should do more, and certainly I've tried to tackle some litter issues in Caldicott, and the businesses that I've visited in Caldicott have been very open to the idea of their involvement in the litter campaign based on a particular town, and they will send their staff out to help litter pick. But as far as you know, tackling it at source by the businesses trying to encourage their customers to be more responsible, I think that's really difficult. But we need to try it.
Thank you. Did you want to come back at all with that response, Councillor?
When I was saying businesses, I was thinking more employees. Everyone's got somewhere to eat, need to go get food. I work full-time as well as this. I will get my lunch on my way back to my office. I won't throw my rubbish out of the car, I'm pleased to say. I think it's disgusting. I think our comms team could get involved with this. Instagram, Twitter and Facebook are such powerful tools. I don't agree with shaming people in, you know, filming them. I think promoting good behaviour. I think if we work with businesses and give awards, you know, we have Monmouthshire Business Awards, we could link it in with their litter champions. They can everybody loves a bit of praise, do we not? I love promoting myself on Facebook. I do it every day. I think we could use that really good with this and promoting litter champions within businesses and getting gold stars, or if there's ever employee benefits, you know, they could tie it in with that way. Obviously, it's a massive thing here that we could work with, and I can't really articulate myself in a short few minutes on what I'm thinking, but I think businesses would be up for getting involved, and we could promote their business for being litter champions. You know, you could have the overall business with awards schemes as well. That's more what I was thinking, rather than customers, because I think that falls on the venue itself's responsibility.
Thank you, Councillor Dimmock. You raised some very valuable points there. If I can now take Councillor Guppy and then Councillor Eason's questions.
Yes, thank you. I think, you know, we've got to go down to a wider stream of preventative, because that's going to help. I think we need to work, as I said, with the businesses. It's something that we're not doing. But also, I think we need to be working and maybe sort of putting some more onus on the housing associations. Now, there's huge issues with storage of rubbish, and I get a lot of comments with people putting rubbish out too early for collection, and then I get a lot of complaints about, you know, the bags have been broken, so the rubbish is everywhere, and then nobody takes ownership of it. But there's quite a lot. You see that people putting rubbish out far too early, and unfortunately, it's sort of the areas that the houses haven't got the ability to store them. And I think that we need to sort of step up with the housing associations, to take onus off that, because it is going to help it is going to help. And if we can not put that rubbish out early, it doesn't get damaged and it doesn't spread that, and then you get lack of complaints. It makes the whole system more efficient. And I think we need to sort of start putting onuses on our housing associations. Just say, come on, step it up, do some preventative work. They're visiting they're visiting the houses, they're visiting the areas a lot, and it's going to help us with more pairs of eyes. The more it's easier to action and get on top of it.
Thank you, Councillor Guppy. Does anybody want to respond to our working with housing associations on this particular problem?
It's certainly something that we do a lot of as education officers. We visit people who put their waste out early, regularly. It's one of the things we get most complaints about, and it does result in a lot of litter. The housing associations are kind of less committed to doing that. And we do kind of struggle a bit to get them kind of engaged in engaging their tenants in their effective proper behaviour.
Thank you. If I can take next Councillor
Madam
Eason.
Chairman, just on responding to that, could I just quickly say that in my area of Wisham, I had a big problem. I still have a big problem in people putting their bins out early. And you say you're educating people, but the MHA, the officer in charge in Wisham, was very, very proactive and went and visited this particular block of flats and offered them education and reasons why they should put out the bins and what times and things like that. So there are people out there from the housing associations doing good work. So it'd be a shame if that's not reciprocated everywhere, obviously. But
thank you. If I could now take Councillor Eason, then Councillor Jones, and then Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I concur with Councillor Jones's view that Moorish Housing do get involved in my ward, particularly on the blocks of flats and areas like that. So there is interaction between them and Carl's department. But my main point I want to talk about is what we haven't touched on this morning is industrial type fly tipping. I sit on the NRW board of the drainage board on the south, which is the levels, and that is a massive problem on the levels. And NRW obviously have cost problems of removing that, and no doubt Carl's department as well, because no matter what you say, you've got to try and identify these culprits. I'll give you one example going back some months where I was travelling home from here over Wentwood, and on the side of the road, both sides of the road for about a mile, there were piles of tyres. So clearly somebody had a lorry load and just dropped them off and carried on moving. Now that cost Nigel Leeworthy a lot of time, a lot of effort to remove them. To identify these people, that is a problem. And I think that you have this quite frequently. I generally give you a call because there's been some industrial fly tipping in my ward. So identifying culprits of industrial type fly tipping is important, because that, I think, is causing a bigger blight on the countryside because some of these things are not able for the litter pickers to put in a bag, quite honestly. They've got to go on the back of a lorry. I don't know what Carl would feel about how we can enforce that, because on the next agenda item, we'll see that public protection maybe had one or two prosecutions over the last number of years, particularly on the Blorenge area, which I've seen. And I think you haven't touched the national parks of you, but I think Blorenge came up, and I think Clydach Gorge came up. You don't touch the levels, I know that, but perhaps we need more enforcement on flight, industrial flight tippers particularly.
Okay,
Just very quickly, Chair. Yeah, I mean, it's recognised. I mean, it's the evidential issues, the problem. You've got a pile of inert stuff. We have tried covert cameras before now, unsuccessfully. Would you believe they've stolen the covert camera and stamped up and down it and driven off? So it is difficult, and obviously NRW tend to deal with the big guns in terms of that national problem where, you know, it's huge money involved, isn't there, in terms of skip loads of waste and they indiscriminately dump it around the county. Something you're aware of, something we're agreeing with NRW, and again, through the litter strategy, we do refer to fly tipping, and certainly we'd look to improve our enforcement role with that, with the proviso that the evidence is the big problem.
Thank you. If I can for the rest of this discussion, because we must move on, can I ask members to really to concentrate on these themes and giving a steer on where our resources are going to be prioritised, because obviously the council is facing huge challenges this year as regarding to funding, and we do need to give a clear message. As so far, obviously enforcement has been one of the main areas that we've covered, but if I could ask members to concentrate on those 5 options. Councillor Jones. Do you want?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just briefly on tenants and putting rubbish out early. I've got a lot of flats in my ward. Most of them are very good. Some of them put out their rubbish the day after rubbish or recycling collection. I just cannot possibly understand why they do that. But every flat has in the garden area a store where they can keep their recycling and their rubbish. So there are no excuses whatsoever. It's the same everywhere. Don't pander to excuses. It upsets other residents around when people are antisocial and put out their litter much too early. As has been mentioned, bags get ripped open and stuff goes all over the place. There's no excuse for it, and that is the bottom line. Can I just say on these 5 options, I've looked at them, but I'd really love a steer from you officers are the ones that have got to implement them. I'd like to know from you, basically, what you like, and if we agree with it, stick our hands up.
Okay, that's a good point. And can I first of all, before officers say the options, if I can ask David Jackman whether he's obviously he's made his points at the beginning. Did you want to add anything more to the debate at this point?
Nothing to add, but to join up, I'm determined to go away with something today, I suppose, to join up a couple of suggestions that came out here. Councillor Dimmock talked about engaging with local businesses. Councillor Jones talked about a posters campaign in schools. Why not find a couple of businesses to sponsor a competition in schools? They'll pay for that. They love the publicity. And then you get a load of signs with some local ownership from the right age group, funded by business. That seems to me like a no-brainer, a really good investment in an officer's time to make that connection. So I was really encouraged about that. And just picking up Mark's point about the cost of bins, £400 for a new bin. Yes, if you go for the full plastic bodied thing, £150 if you go for the ones with transparent bags that you can easily see if they're half full. They're the ones that are used on the continent, and they're used for a reason. There's no point in stopping to check a bin if you can just drive past it and see if it's half full or full. We use the cheaper version. I can see every time I drive past one of our bins if it's half empty or nearly full. And it you could get 3 for the price of 1 maybe if you looked at that option rather than I appreciate the ones in town centres. You've kind of you've got that age-old design with Abergavenny logo on it and everything, but we do a much cheaper version in the rural areas with a sign on a wooden post. It may be better bang for your buck. But
thank you very much for that, David. And if you can now sum up.
Okay, so having heard a lot of the views, I think enforcement has come across quite strongly. I think the enforcement for us, whilst for the Landvangle Crewcorny group, is more about fixed penalty notices for litter. In the enforcement terms of what we're looking at, it is fly tipping, so it's that industrial scale fly tipping. It's the bags and the boxes that are put out too early causing the problem, as well as the people who drop litter, drop fag ends and drop chewing gum. So our enforcement side is much bigger than just fixed penalty notices for that. The infrastructure side has also come across strongly. We will review our bins. What we're trying to do through the strategy and the wider piece of work is to rationalise our bins. There are many areas, Goitre being one of the areas where there's 4 bins within 20 yards of each other. What we need to do is spread those bins over a much wider area. We know that, and that's a piece of ongoing work that we're looking at. I think we've got that coming from the committee. I think on the promotion side of it, already working with Lanvangle Group, really quite interested in working with employers to work with their employees, and if we can tie that back into a schools campaign as well, why wouldn't we? We have a very limited budget, we have a very limited resource. If we can hit the two together, that would seem to make sense to us. We will include these things in the strategy as projects going forward, develop the strategy based on what we're hearing back today, and then come back hopefully with the strategy to council to get endorsed by full council as the strategy moving forward. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dimmock.
If I can, I'd like to work with you on that. I know I'm not allowed to really, but I would like to guide you maybe and help with that. I think us as representatives, we know the businesses in our wards. I think we can all get a bit involved in that. I don't think littering should be a council problem, an authority problem. I think it's the residents of an area. People should be proud where they live and they should look after it. I think if we get this started, the onus will be on them. Yeah? Thank you.
I agree, and I mean, recently the initiative I've organised in my own ward, which was with Costain, MCC, and the local caving group to recover all of the dump waste from the gorge, did show Costain actually stepped up to the plate, provided a flatbed truck, did all the planning work. And I think, you know, we have to start thinking outside the box, because one thing's really clear is the majority of our residents hate this problem as much as we do. And, you know, we have to use all the resources we have at our disposal to really try and eradicate this terrible problem that we've got with littering. So, Councillor Smith.
Chairman, something's come through to my mind. What category do hedge clippings go into? I represent a rural ward and also a bit of urban. What are hedge clippings categorised as? Please. You've answered my questions. I live in a rural area where we all drive through lanes that have had hedges trimmed, and the stuff is strewn over the road. It's thorns, the lot. It begins the feeling of sort of, this is a neglected area. What the heck does it matter if I throw my fag packet out now, my McDonald's onto that, because this is a mess. So I just wondered where that came, and it isn't categorised as litter. That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think before I sum up, I'd just like to invite our guests if they'd like to make any further contributions. So if I could ask Maggie or Andrea whether you wanted to add anything before the end of this agenda item.
There was 1 or 2 points I picked up on. The one about the fly tipping. How did you catch them? If the cameras aren't effective, I think someone said. How were they caught?
In my particular ward, we've actually recovered waste from the bottom of the gorge, which people have thrown bins in there with names and addresses on, things like prescriptions. So, you know, environmental health officers can search through the rubbish and gain intelligence, which may lead them to the culprit.
Okay.
I think that's...
Thank you. And the other question I had was about the money back on plastic bottles and cans or whatever. And I just think it would be such a good idea, because we know, I think it was Wales that started the plastic bag 5p. And it's only 5p, but I know I hate to pay that 5p. And loads of people do because they've collected thousands from it. So I just think it would be such a good idea to move that along if possible. And as for the chewing gum, couldn't the companies be targeted to get them to put a sign on to dispose of their litter, something on, like they do on the cigarette packets? I don't know. I'm just a few ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I think the problem is, we have to work with what we can really put into effect, and it is terribly difficult with this issue of chewing gum. But thank you. Andrea, Maggie, is it? Andrea.
Yes, I think it's really important that we address litter in the way it actually happens. So you tackle it at source, then you tackle the prevention of dropping it, and then the enforcement and the clearing up as well. So I think we've had some really positive feedback, and certainly we'll go back with lots of good feedback for the group, I think, as well, won't we? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Did you have anything more to add, David, before I sum up? No. So I think it's been a really interesting debate. I think moving forward, we'd like to know what the outcome is of the pilot, and how many months is that? When are you going to evaluate that? Have you decided?
Sorry, that has triggered a final thought, which is how are we going to measure success? And we talked about the weakness of the current measure by Keep Wales Tidy. That measure won't move an inch because of the trial we're doing, because we're in a rural area. So I think we need to sit down with the officers and first just make sure we're happy how we're going to measure the success, and try to suggest something that could be applied across the other parts of Monmouthshire. Otherwise, it'll be too subjective.
And I think maybe we have to have our own measurement of success if we haven't got one from, the large organisations, then we must create our own. And I think it would be good if we had a meeting to follow up, and Councillor Dimmock could be involved as well, so that we can forward this strategy of working with business and an education and a competition in schools. I think those are all really good ideas. So I think, are you happy, Mark, with the steer that you've been given by members today?
Yes, thank you.
And can I thank members for, I think this has been a really engaging debate, and for our team that have come along from Clanverhangle, Crickhorny. You really have made such a contribution, and I think you're holding us to account and giving us new ideas, and I think that this is really a positive way forward. So we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
So I think we've concluded that agenda item now, and we will now move on to public protection, and that is agenda item 5, and then we will be taking agenda item 6, which will be Usk in Bloom. Okay, members, I think we need to crack on. Okay, fine. So we now move on to public protection. I understand we do have a report. Once again, can we please have notification of these reports, and where possible, if they can be circulated before the meeting, because it then will make our meetings far more effective moving forward. Thank you.
Yeah, noted, Madam Chair. Just to say, there's nothing new in this slide. So if you've read the report, it's all in here. Well, this is a summary. Defending myself now. But there's nothing there isn't in the report. So basically what we try to do is, because there's 19 pages of information, which I think members do struggle with, which is fair enough. There's a lot of vast stuff that we get involved with. So the reason for that really is just to summarise and just sort of pick up some of the key points. So mine is very much just an overview. And then what we try and do, as members will know from when we present this before, is just trying to focus in on one of those areas. So Gareth's turn this time round. So we'll have a particular look at scams and what the team do around scams are very topical currently. So this is something that members will be used to, something we come to with you regularly, and it's basically just trying to show you what the changes are over time. So the report covers that over the last 4 years. So we got trends as to what's increasing in terms of officer activity and what may be declining. The purpose of the report is, as per the covering report, Cabinet did ask us to go every 6 months to report on performance to ensure that there's no drop in that performance across the teams, because we had some budget reductions in 2014. So that's the purpose and the reason it's before you. In terms of resources, as I say, it's in the report. That's what we're talking about. 35 staff, just over 30 full-time equivalents across the teams of environmental health, training, standards and licensing. The budget, if you look back to the previous year, very slight increase from just under 1.3 million to just over 1.3 million. In terms of like a summary account of what's before members today, the ticks are what's going well. The ones that, well, not much we've got any control over, some of the reactive work, and I think we've got a cross that we can perhaps pick up as we go along. The Food Standards Agency are the governing body for food safety, and they monitor us very closely. So what's the position in terms of Monmouthshire? The numbers are within the report. We're online in terms of delivering those food hygiene inspections, which is key. People will be aware if things go wrong. There's very negative publicity for the authority and obviously those food traders should that happen. We've got away from numbers. We've inspected 320, doesn't really tell you much. What we're looking at is what's the improvements over time. So if you look at compliance, and everyone's aware of the STAR system now, food hygiene rating schemes, legally are presented at the premises, and 87% of all those premises across Monmouthshire currently are 4 or 5 star. So that's a very good standard of compliance. And that's improved over the years. So again, the report reflects that. We've got a steady increase across those higher rated premises. Something that is an issue across all the teams is an increase in the reactive nature of the work. So we got very many more service requests than we have been previously. So within this team alone, 20% increase in service requests. So that's an issue in terms of the capacity to deliver that. And we also had quite a shift in terms of communicable diseases for the first 6 months of this year as well. Health and safety accidents, so people tend to think that's HSE, so picking up Councillor Dimmock's point about working with workplaces, I think we've got a role there because we're actually in regularly looking at health and safety standards. Gareth's team will be looking at consumer law, etc. So I think there's an opportunity there in terms of what was discussed in the last item. Gas and catering safety and cellar safety projects. We do engage in national campaigns. That's been quite informative. We have served a number of notices, about 6 so far, in terms of carbon monoxide build-up in cellars, for example, and also cellar safety in regards to hatches being left up. There have been some quite nasty injuries there. WH Smith recently prosecuted nearly £500,000 for not having a safe system of work in terms of retrieving goods in a cellar-type setting. So we're actively engaged with that. We do also, just thinking about refuse and commercial premises, inform them about the security of those waste provisions, mainly to stop rats bouncing around the place, but also it does help in terms of stopping that litter floating around as well. So again, I think there's an opportunity in terms of the litter strategy to engage with environmental health, which deal with commercial premises in those settings. Swiftly on to what we call the public health team, which is generally domestic type situations. Noise complaints up significantly, 21% up from the same period last year. What we think that is because of the exceptionally warm summer. People are more irate, sat in their gardens, trying to enjoy their barbecue, and they got Barry Manilow pumping away next door, or someone's let him rip with his drum kit. I think it's because of open windows, etc. has been a real issue for the team, and that's been difficult to manage for the first 6 months of this year. Other nuisances have gone up as well. The 249, that includes what came up on the last item. That's our response to dog fouling, fly tipping, littering, etc. So I won't repeat what was said earlier on that. Pest control, again, a slight increase. Again, maybe calmer weather in terms of rats, mice, etc. So we are involved with that as well. Good news, air quality sensors now are installed at Monmouth School, secondary school, and also Usk Primary School. Makes sense because we got elevated air quality issues in those areas, and that gives us live recordings. So we'll use that as an educational tool as well with the schools. So they're installed in the last 6 months. Private water supplies, I did mention the Cross, so not all good news. That has dipped because, back to the previous slides, because of the increase in complaints that the team are dealing with, they haven't had an opportunity to be proactively out looking at private water supplies. We have obviously looking to address that in the remainder of this year. So we've got an action plan now to make sure we get out to those private water supplies between now and the end of March. Housing, we deal with private sector housing enforcement. We've dealt with 79 complaints so far in the 6 months, and obviously an impact of the new licensing regime that's come in, as members will be aware of the scheme that's licensing Cardiff, Rent Smart Wales, and we're obviously out and about making sure that people are getting licensed, and we've had a very good success rate in terms of getting landlords subscribed to that. The final line, I think, is quite important, isn't it? We got 1,133 new complaints to the department, not about us, they complain about one another, etc. And that signifies a 29% increase compared to the same period last year. So we think weather's been a big factor, but I think it's important to say, is this a big team? Within that particular team, we're talking about 6.5 staff. So these guys are flat out reacting to stuff, quite contentious, neighbours that hate each other, etc. And statutory, we've got to deal with those. So that's a massive capacity issue for us. Licensing, again, I won't labour this. Some members will be on licensing committee. Again, we have seen an increase in the levels of service requests. That's 10 applications in terms of temporary events, taxi drivers, etc. So again, for a very small team, we've seen a 13% increase across the team. A positive would be joint operations. We've recently undertaken with immigration, so we do go to takeaways, etc., to make sure people have right to work in the country, and that will be taken up by police colleagues. Fire safety is there in terms of when we do find problems, they obviously comment as well in terms of what they're finding, particularly in terms of those sort of fast food outlet type situations. And passenger transport unit, you'll expect a liaison with them in terms of home to school transport, etc., and licensed drivers, etc. Again, members will know, because we went to full council last month, the gambling policy was approved. On the back of that, I think that's a shiny new document. What we will be doing is obviously pursuing those betting shops, etc., to ensure they got risk assessments to manage problem gambling. It's enjoyed by many. People think National Lottery, etc. But in terms of those problem gamblers, we will be out and about now in the next few months to make sure they've got proper provision there to identify people, self-banning orders, etc. There are things that can be done, which is quite, again, topical at the moment. It's on national news in terms of fixed odd betting terminals. Was on the news last night, I know. So that's positive as well. That's what I'm going to say about licensing. Just one that's often overlooked is events. So we tend not to think perhaps too much about events. Labour intensive is well written on there. For officers across this team, we spend an awful lot of time advising major events across the county. I wouldn't like to put in man hours the amount of time we spent on firework displays. Obviously, it's a sigh of relief on the 6th of November because we can down tools in terms of making sure those events are safe. I think it's important. The Abergavenny event, for example, attracted 2,500 people. It doesn't happen by chance in terms of safe parking, safe distances, run successfully without any errors. Hats off to Abergavenny round table, but to be assured that highway staff are helping out. Lawrence in terms of the health and safety provisions within one of our parks, environmental health in terms of food safety, distances, etc. We do cover the health and safety within those premises as well. So that's a real success story, and I think that's something that we will be prioritising going forward. Again, I think so a common theme here is the increase in the amount of stuff we got through. So in that piece alone, we got 36% increase from that same period last year. So what we're seeing is a whole shift of more and more stuff, which is really good from a tourism and footfall situation. It does cause some issues for us in terms of obviously trying to manage that and give them the proper advice and information. So that's my quick, literally whip through. Like I say, nothing there that's not on the report. But if I move over to Gareth, he'll similarly zip through the TS issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Morning, everyone. They're just some of the areas I was looking to cover with a focus on scams, but I will quickly go through it and ensure if it's time for questions, and you can come back to me, and I'm more than happy to pick some things up after. Right, so the first 6 months with regards to trading standards and animal health, what we've had is a significant impact sort of on the staff side of things. So we had an additional resource through feed inspections, which is now being funded direct from Welsh Government through the FSA, Food Standards Agency. Unfortunately, our member of staff, her husband is in the forces and he was relocated. So all of a sudden we lost somebody with a good expertise, not something you can go out into the market and pull straight in, unfortunately. So in the first 6 months, that's affected us in the sense of at the moment we're at 10% of our expected inspections. At this point, I would hope normally that we'd be up more towards 60%. As I have a more national role with this work, what I'm a little bit more comfortable with is the fact that every other region in Wales is only around 40%. So it's what we tend to find is this element of work relates to the next 2 quarters. So hopefully, come the end of January, we'll be in a far more effective position, especially as I've been able to take on new staff, which is helping us to catch up. I think the biggest issue I'd like to point out is that in the meantime, it's had a knock-on effect to trading standard staff because I've had to bring them in from other duties and reallocate their work. Also, whilst we replaced one vacancy with animal health officer, our only full-time animal health officer was taken seriously ill. He's just coming up now to 6 months on ill health, and he's awaiting surgery for dialysis preparation. So again, it's something where your hands are tied. We're trying to support, whereas at the same time, he's 65 in January, and it's a case of managing that sort of it enables us to keep delivering. We're also sensitive to his circumstances. Illicit tobacco, we have a particular problem premises in the south of the county where we've raided several times, and despite that, we've consistently found other problems coming out of that. Complaints similar to the other services in public protection. Whilst complaints generally and notifications are pretty consistent, referrals have gone up by 25% in the first 6 months. New businesses, we feel is an important area to have contact with. It's consistent with the wider authority approach in supporting business. But again, it's purely because we're reactive, it's very difficult to engage with those. We'd like to engage with new businesses within 28 days of becoming aware of them. Very often it's a case of when we get round to it, we will. But certainly on the trading standards side, it's, the feeds had a knock-on effect on that. And underage sales, whilst we don't have a significant issue, we don't have a huge intelligence base. When we do put test purchasing operations on, they are quite time-consuming and resource-intensive. And of course, as a public authority, we've got to comply with legal requirements such as RIPA and the Home Office Code of Practice. So I've sourced an alternative approach to underage sales, which we're piloting this year, which hopefully then will give us a greater level of intelligence to enable us then, if we need to take an official or formal test purchases, we can focus our resource there. I've covered some of that staffing side already, so I'll skip over that. The emergency appointment, again, thankfully, there was an opportunity with my involvement on the regional side to bring in some funding on top of Monmouthshire funding to appoint a senior animal health officer stroke regional coordinator. And with that in mind, it's looking at collaboration, again, how we can work across borders rather than trying individually to sort of keep propping things up. But I'm more than happy to discuss that in further detail. The Animal Health Welfare Partnership Delivery Programme with Welsh Government, it's only an additional 200,000 across Wales, but it is, from our perspective, a significant amount. And again, it just allows us to be a bit more proactive on occasion. Unfortunately, some authorities do look at it as a way of replacing internal funding, but again, all that does is create other issues and other problems. Right, scams. Today would have been an ideal opportunity to have a focus on scams, and in particular, there's a scheme which I'll mention in the next slide, Friends Against Scams, which is basically a 20-minute presentation, and then you're all seen as Friends Against Scams. You can sign up and spread the good word. I think going on how today's gone so far, that would have been a complete nightmare to have tried. I would welcome people's thoughts as to whether that's something you'd be willing to consider either at the future meeting, maybe a member awareness session, or maybe another meeting which could be slotted in without being too time consuming. But it really is sort of important that this message is pushed out. Scams. So why do we do scams? Well, at the end of the day, we're dealing with real people. Every one of us will have either been affected by scams or know somebody who has been. We refer to them as scams, but the reality is they're fraud. Fraud's a crime, and that's how they really should be looked at and treated. It's also known as financial abuse, which again fits in with the new social care legislation and the duty on the authority to ensure that these are being dealt with. We all know there's mail scams, telephone scams, digital scams, doorstep scams, and unfortunately, more and more it's coming clear that there's just no respect by the criminals or anything. Even this year now, we've had counterfeit products in relation to remembrance and poppies and everything. So there really is no level that I don't think these people would sink to. Mass marketing mail scams alone cost the UK £3.5 billion worth of detriment, and scams as a whole are estimated to be between 5 and 10 billion. 53% of people aged over 65 have been scammed. 37% of people have been targeted 5 times or more. 45% of people have no action taken to prevent themselves or protect themselves from being victims of scams. And only 5% of scam victims actually report this matter to law enforcement. And we've dealt with around 134 people within Monmouthshire who have been identified as people who have responded to scams. And on that basis alone, we're probably more in the region of 2,500 residents potentially who, you know, we really need to be having communication with. We're all potential scam victims, but unfortunately it's often the lonely and the isolated that are the ones that are targeted. The latest scam issue that I can tell you hot off the press is a catalogue scam. Now, I wouldn't say it's brand new because we've had catalogue scams in the past, but this one is selling products which offers to cure weight loss, hearing issues, back and leg pain, as well as claims of more serious illnesses. And it's not only that people get duped into buying these things, which often aren't what they say they are, and certainly don't do what they claim to do, but they also then fall in to become victims of subscriptions traps as well. Just a slide there covering some of the things that we're trying to do to combat scams. We've got the Wales Against Scams partnership, which is led by the Older People's Commissioner for Wales. Obviously, locally, we try to provide as much advice and guidance and do presentations to any groups who request. Call blockers is one element that helps combat the obviously telephone scams. In South Wales alone, in the last 4 years, 148 True Call units which have been fitted in old and vulnerable people's residents have blocked over 30,000 calls. And it's just frightening to think the numbers and the levels of calls that are going on. Scam Marshals, that is basically a scheme where people who have been victims of scams have been identified and we've had a conversation with them. And it's actually turning it around because often, as I mentioned, they're isolated, they're lonely. They see it as something to do, albeit often, you know, they are being conned out to their savings. We actually turn around and say, well, actually, can you do a job here? Can you record what you're receiving? Speak to your neighbours, see if other people are receiving it, record that information and feed it to us. Because whilst a lot of these scams we can't deal with on an enforcement level locally, nationally, that information is vital. And if we can feed that back, then great. So again, it's something that I'd actively encourage people to become part of. Friends Against Scams, I mentioned earlier, and this is basically a project that aims to prevent people from becoming victims of scams by empowering communities to take a stand against scams. It's designed to inspire action, highlight the scale of the problem, change the perceptions of why people fall for scams, and make scams a community, regional and national topic. They've actually got a target of 1 million friends to be signed up by 2020. And there's a target in Wales of about 50,000. Hence the reason I was hoping we could do a session here, maybe that members would again sign up to. Yeah. Another element is Call in Time Partnership, which has been set up with Age UK, which is basically a free telephone friendship service, which again I think is relevant to a lot more. Not just scam victims, but anybody really who's in isolation. So again, you know, it's set up so that anybody over 60 can call this line, speak to a person, and form a friendship over the phone, and hopefully then we can work with them to establish again if there's any issues that we need to pick up on. And that's the blanket book. Okay. Right, I only quickly touch on Brexit. I know we've had enough of that on the radio and everything that's going on as we sit here. Madam Chairman attended an event with me recently that the WLGA put on, and I think it was a bit of an eye-opener, and certainly it does draw your attention to the amount of money that's being spent on this, and certainly in central government and various organisations, a lot of money being invested. But local authorities, to a degree, aren't being included in that. We've been told there's money available that we can put in a funding bid. Yet, actually, what we put in the funding bid in for, there's no point taking money in just to throw away. But again, I'll skip over that. What I will say is, Councillor Jones, cabinet member, asked me to hold more copies of this booklet. Which I'll leave with her because I've got 10 copies. But it certainly is worth an interesting read, even though that's only specifically in relation to sort of regulatory services. The only other thing I would touch on there is the fact that we're already experiencing loss of veterinary expertise with a number of vets that work for APA and the Animal Plant and Health Agency, who we rely on to give us expert evidence. So without them being available, it does have an effect on us being able to take a necessary enforcement action, which again is something that's been considered by Welsh Government. Other considerations, quite clearly, is an opportunity for people to take advantage. The import side of things, the disease risks from an animal health perspective. You know, I could go on well, for the rest of the morning, but it's only 2 minutes. But again, it's something that really needs to be thought about. And further information I just wanted to touch on there. There's another 2 booklets. I've got an updated handbook for members, which I'm going to leave in each of your trays, which hopefully will give you a better understanding of the wider remit of trading standards and what we cover. And there's also a booklet that's been produced by our professional body on the value of some of those services. But again, whilst there's some very good work in there and we use it as a good practice guide, unfortunately, you're up against some authorities who've got a significantly different level of resource. So again, whilst I would welcome that, to be able to do some of it, it's about finding what we can do on a local level reasonably. Mobile animal exhibit licensing is something that's going to be coming in the new year, which is going to be additional burden and unlikely to have any resource other than recuperating through the license fee, the cost of administrating it. There's consultations been on wild animals in circuses, and due in the new year, the Minister recently announced that there would be a third-party sales of puppies consultation, again, with regards to expanding on the work that they've done on dog breeders and the problem we've got with illegal imports. Minimum unit pricing, again, it's been in the news, it's been agreed that there's going to be a minimum levy. There's going to be some resource coming with that, thankfully. But again, it's just over 3 years, and it's going to be limited to the first year, where there'll be a focus on visiting any premises that basically sells alcohol. And the last thing I mentioned there was animal licensing conditions. Again, in England, they've gone down the route of having one license for all animal licenses, whereas at the moment in Wales, we've still got separate licenses. But again, in the interest of consistency and ensuring that we are actually recovering our costs, then I'm looking to do a review of that early in the new year. And now I've got 2 new officers with experience. Hopefully that will help. That's a quick skip through. It doesn't cover half of what I'd written down.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, Gareth and Dave. And it never ceases to amaze me what an incredibly wide portfolio this department have, and the very important and critical job they do in keeping the public safe, and the increased pressures and demands facing things like Brexit, etc., is only going to increase, the pressures on that department. So I was interested as well. Something that I've wanted to bring to this committee since I started was the issue of trafficking and modern day slavery. And I notice yet again we have issues there. And I think of these poor people that have been trafficked into this country illegally and then are probably working for extremely low wages. And that is something that I'd like very much to look at in the future. And I value your input when we do look at that particular item. So if I can now throw this over to members, and just to draw your attention to the recommendations that you consider and comment on the report, and also in 2.3 that if you've got any strong views on any particular topics, because this is such a wide portfolio, and this very serious issue of scams, there's lots of things that perhaps we can look at in more detail in the future. So members, if I can, Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for an excellent presentation, both. My question is regarding the recommendation 2.2, where you're suggesting that the 6-month reports for public protection could be moved to 12 months. And I'm slightly concerned with the kind of environment that we have now, not being political, not mentioning Brexit at all. Things may change quite radically in 6 months' time compared to where we are today. And if we don't have some form of feedback at that time, with radical changes potentially underway, it could lead to some difficult conversations at the 12-month stage. So I'm just wondering, if you were wanting to go down that route, would you actually be able to provide us with an interim update, perhaps, if things do change dramatically? Or would you be able to give some form of verbal assurance that things are okay at the 6-month mark? Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, if I can respond to that. I think perhaps, yes, if we're coming twice a year anyway, I think if recommendations 2.2 and 2.3 before you, one is about the annual report, but since we'll be there perhaps potentially in November this time of year, then we could do that exception reporting. This is how we're getting on. 90% of it's fine, but we've got some issues in terms of animal feed stuffs, in terms of private water supplies. So I don't see any problem with that, Chair. So we can continue that as we go. Yeah.
Point well made. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just to endorse what Councillor Rodens just said, you're doing a brilliant job, your department, along with the licensing, and I don't quite know how you manage to keep it up. But obviously, from what this report is saying, you're getting additional pressures now. Same number of people, or somebody on long-term sick, even less numbers. So it's bound to sooner or later reflect on what you can do and what you can't do. So we need to let you to let us know where pressures are, and basically what we can do to help, not just look and say, oh, that's sad. If we're here to help, or we should be in any case. So if there's unbearable pressures, we need to know about it, so that you can continue the vital work that you do. In certain cases, matters of life and death, let's be perfectly honest. And we should not be slipping up because you're under too much pressure and we're not helping you enough. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Well said. Councillor Harris. Councillor Guppy.
Yes, thank you for the presentation and the main report. Always vast amount of work. One request and one question I make today is that I recently, and I don't know how long the scheme's been going for the Ask for Angela scheme within the Pub Watch. I know that the licensing do an awful lot with, and then taxis scheme, and with asking for underage, but this is a scheme that I've recently come across that somebody actually told me about, and I saw it in a pub, and also they said how it was a good idea. It's a scheme that I'm not quite sure if it's just targeted at women, but obviously I'm not quite sure why it would be just women. It was displayed on the back of pub doors in view of if you meet somebody you feel vulnerable, with a dating. You don't have to sort of meet anybody from a dating agency, but the pub is trained. If somebody comes up and requests for Ask for Angela, there's a scheme really then to support them in any way they can to get out of that situation or remove them from that situation, or help provide a taxi. I think it would be good that if we could take this forward in Monmouthshire as a request. Perhaps we could do that, and perhaps further feedback within the licensing department or licensing committee. And my second question really is parking, and you're going to be taking on that remit from the police. I've just asked, how are we going to resource that? Because it's a huge, huge issue. And I take my hat off for you, and I hope we've got some extra staffing within this authority for you to take on, because I'm sure the pressures within the, your department is big enough, and it's going to get bigger.
I'll do part one, and Roger can answer in terms of car park. It still remain within operations. I think the connection was, if there's some capacity within the car parking team, can they do some enviro crime enforcement? Back to the earlier item on the agenda. In terms of your first bit about pub watch, absolutely we'd support that. Our licensed officer actively involved with those pub watch schemes anyway. So yeah, anything we can do to encourage safe people going around. And I think for us, I think we sometimes miss a trick, don't we? I mean, you talk about vulnerable people, and everyone goes straight off to social care to talk about children's services, etc. We do a lot with vulnerable people in terms of young girls on high streets, etc. Safe transport home is an issue that certainly we deal with. We need to badge it perhaps in terms of vulnerable people, and also this whole thing about people in very dodgy accommodation, not a very technical term, but in terms of people living above takeaways, there's a lot of work we do that goes under the radar, I think. So I think it's another example of dealing with vulnerable people and making sure we get that heard, which is back to Councillor Harris's point, I believe, in terms of capacity, isn't it? In terms of, you know, what gives? Do the wheels fall off the wagon, or can we do things a bit differently? And I think Roger will expand now on the issue in terms of enforcement, in terms of street scene type stuff. But certainly we welcome that, and if we can sort of work with our colleagues in Waste and Street Service, then clearly that should free up some capacity for some of the issues I've spoken about this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Presently, we've got enforcement officers who manage our car parks. We've got a manager, an admin clerk, and 3 car park officers, and a cash collector. And that's the extent of your team, which currently manages Monmouthshire's car parks. When we take on street car parking, the studies and evidence from other authorities in the previous report shows that we will generate income. That income will be used to fund, well, you generate income as long as you find people, putting it bluntly. But to find people, you need staff to do that. So we are going to extend that team, and we hope to have 6 enforcement officers. But to offer I'm sure they could be fully employed managing traffic, but to offer best use of what resources we have, and so as we can redirect them perhaps to other areas which members consider of equal or even higher priority to try and blitz things, we want to create a team which can undertake civil enforcement rather than civil parking enforcement. So it will include littering. It will include the, I wish I knew what it stood for, PSBOs, it's the behaviour issues about public order, orders. It will include car parking. It will include all of those items up to a point. What's reasonable to expect that team to enforce within the public area, within our public spaces. So they're better, they're more wider than purely doing car park and on-street parking problems. It doesn't actually increase your resource, but it will perhaps make it a better resource. The charging for on-street fines will generate more money so as we can have more people. We're just going to try and make better use of them as best we can.
Thank you. Are you? Yeah, I think we need to now really move on as quickly as we can, because we are half an hour behind schedule, and I'm mindful that we've Mr. Keir is here from the Uskin Bloom. So are there, if we can just concentrate on trading standards, are there any more particular questions from members with a trading standards focus? Councillor Webb. Thank you, and I think we will wrap this item up now. Mayor, thank you for your excellent presentation, and we also look forward to, I think there's going to be a debate in the new year on Brexit, because really the implications are extremely far-reaching, and as a council we have to protect our rural economy especially. So that must be at the top of our mind. Thank you very much indeed. And if I could invite Mr. Keir to give his presentation on our next item, which is Usk in Bloom. Okay, members, so if I can introduce Tony Keir, who's come along to speak to us from Usk in Bloom. We offer you a warm welcome. And also Kath, who's come along as well. And I think Mr. Keir is going to give us a presentation about Usk in Bloom. Is Kath going to introduce first? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. For those that don't know me, I'm Kath Fallon. I head up Enterprise and Community Development. It's with great pleasure I'm here with Mr. Keir today from Usk in Bloom. In February 18, we wrote a report for a one-off contribution of £3,000 to support Usk in Bloom for the 2018 campaign, and also to reflect all the hard work that they've done with the community over the years. Usk in Bloom were actually established in 1981, and since then have garnered over 30 volunteers who've done great work to the extent that Usk is now known as the Town of Flowers. But they're not just focused on planting and floral displays. There's thousands of volunteer hours that have been spent addressing environmental issues and preserving wildlife. And other community work includes weeding, litter picking, repairing and painting street furniture, etc. They have excellent accolades, and I'm sure Mr. Keir will tell you all about that in a moment, but they include Wales in Bloom for 36 years, Wales in Bloom winners, 2017 Britain in Bloom, and also have been put forward for Champion of Champions as well. In 2018, they were invited to apply again, hence why we looked at a one-off contribution, which also enabled them to apply for World in Bloom. And the £3,000 really was predominantly looking at changing outdated signage, new flower beds, replacing flower beds, but also in recognition of the loss of the banks in the high street and the high turnover of retailers who would previously have provided funding, but obviously that funding couldn't be guaranteed, and it would have been a crucial year for us not to have that funding in place, hence the one-off contribution. So Mr. Keir is here today really to thank the committee, but also to give us support for their support, but also to provide an update on the successes that the £3,000 has helped to contribute towards. So over to you.
Thank you, Kath, and thank you everybody for the invitation of the opportunity to be here this morning. Really, to give feedback is specifically what I've been asked to do on the very valuable contribution that the County Council gave our charitable volunteer group earlier in the year, and also the opportunity to very proudly show this, which is the Communities World in Bloom trophy that we won in Canada, presented in Canada only a short few weeks ago, for our where we competed against countries from Hungary, Italy, Canada and Ireland, and we won on the first time entry. So, thank you. So, the quest for support was against the backdrop of the competitions that we were going to be entering this year, which was Wales in Bloom, which we've been entering since 1981 when we were formed, the Britain in Bloom Champion of Champions, and also for the first time the Communities World in Bloom Challenge. That was against the backdrop at the time of the gasworks in the main street, which you know caused a lot of issue, and sadly the failure of some of the businesses within the town. And also, some of you may have seen the TV programme Blooming Marvellous that was aired in April, where last summer we were filmed by the BBC, and we featured in our own 30-minute half-hour programme that was aired in April, and that we now know that the official viewing figures for that particular episode were over 1 million people, and the series is now being repeated as well. And that was also against the backdrop that knowing the champion of champions is normally we compete in class, which is in our case large village against large village or city against city, but we're coming out of class, and we were competing against communities that have garden parks teams, full-time employees, where some of you may know that we are all completely volunteers in that regard. So we had to have a bit of a helping hand in that regard. So the objectives, if I can report back in the report, that excellent report that Kath put together, were £3,000 in which we were to spend replacing the Town of Flowers sign as you're coming in on the way into us, which was outdated. A new flower bed opposite the school, and also replacing the sleeper beds, as well as contributing with a scheme with the retailers in the high street to ensure that the whole of the high street was covered off, and that's a key area that was judged by the judges. The competitions, as I said, were Wales in Bloom, Britain in Bloom, and the World in Bloom, but also, I'm sure many of you are aware of the Open Gardens scheme that's been running now for 23 years, where over 20 people each year open their gardens to members of the public, and they pay to come and have a look at that, and believe it or not, they still paid to come and see mine as well. So, the outcome of where was the money spent, the Town of Flowers sign was renewed. We liaised with your marketing team here and used the design that was used by Monmouthshire County Council for the Eisteddfod. So we linked in with the designer there, and she very kindly rearranged that for us. Rather than create a new flower bed opposite the school, because it was going to be too cluttered, we actually extended 2 further ones, but more into a permanent planting bed rather than annual, so on about consistent savings. We also did renew the sleeper beds, but in conjunction with a new garden designer who moved to the area, and he donated all his time free for 3 days to strip out, dispose of, and rebuild those sleeper beds opposite the school, which if you drive through you will see. And also we had an unbelievable uptake in the number of hanging baskets that went up in businesses within the town. Now, they didn't get them for free. We did say the first one would be free, and the next, second and third would be half price. Everything else above that, they had to still carry on, so it wasn't just a freebie in that regard. Well, was it well spent? Is a question I'm sure I get asked, I'm sure you get asked as well. So what outcomes? Well, first of all, the media coverage that we had at the time of our request was quite phenomenal. It was obviously a quiet news day, and Brexit was in the background, because the BBC ran a 5-minute piece on the hour every hour, and we had over an hour's coverage covering the support that the County Council gave us, and indeed for us as a whole. We know that anecdotally the visitor numbers within the town had gone up. How can I demonstrate that? Well, if you look at Open Gardens as a whole, it was a record year. That over 2,000 visitors came to us that weekend. We know that is a fact because that's because of the ticket sales. And we know that just on ticket sales alone, £20,000 was raised that weekend and handed out to good causes locally. That excludes the businesses within the town. We know, for example, one of the volunteer groups that did teas and coffees profited by over £2,500 alone in one area, and we know that businesses such as the Nag's Head, the Castle, Number 49 Cafe said it was by far their busiest day of the year. So, whilst as an amateur group we can't give you a return on capital percentage, but you only have to look at £3,000 that it produced something in the region of monies that were distributed to good causes back into the local area of near £25,000. It's a pretty good percentage in that regard. Did it make a difference? Well, what I wanted to do, again, is not give my views, was to give the views, if I may, of the judges. These are independent people that came in. This is Wales in Bloom. I've come to expect high standards from USC and a very professional approach from this entry. I was not disappointed. From the riotous colour of the square and throughout the town, everywhere was delighted. Coupled with your ancient heritage, exceptional cleanliness and community involvement with all ages, there is little to fault. And in actual fact, for business areas, specifically, the judge said, the High Street was the most colourful I have ever seen, and it is good to see pubs, shops and other commercial properties entering into the spirit of the campaign with varied floral displays. Now, that's not been the case, and that was very clearly on the back of the support that you gave us. In actual fact, that particular section, we received 19 out of 20 marks in that regard. In Britain in Bloom, the champion of champions, says Wales can be proud of your achievements and consistency in demonstrating how a small team of individuals can transform a community and achieve such many great things. You are all indeed a credit to your nation in making Usk a beautiful and interesting place to visit. And I think that the most interesting feedback, because those judges have been here before. The judges for World in Bloom were from America and Canada, and they'd never been to Usk before. And there were 67 categories that they judged, and we presented for over 8 hours to show them at the community. We'd never done this before, and for a first-time entrance, it was quite remarkable indeed and a surprise that we did win. But specifically in this 30-page report, it says retail shops and restaurants clearly recognise the value of floral displays to their business and have healthy, stunning florals on the street as well as in many courtyards. The municipality, which is the town council and the county council, assists them by offering the hanging baskets at a discount and watering regularly. The two other comments that grabbed me in this report, one of which is, it is very difficult to offer any further suggestions to us with such outstanding floral displays. But also about the future and the sustainability, which is what we all look at. Numerous fundraisers of varying scopes contribute to the bottom line, but depend on the energy and time of individuals involved. These are not stable sources, and a line item on the city budget, your budget, as you Usk in Bloom, has clearly been proven to be a tool for greater economic development in Usk, would be very, very helpful. That's been my view for a long time. And in actual fact, for those that you don't know, Usk is the only large community where their council doesn't pay for every floral display. The annual cost to us is round about between, shall we say, 13 and 17,000 pounds for the public floral displays. And when I took over, about 10% of that money came from the town council. Now it's about a third, but we still have to raise, as volunteers, as a charitable group, something in the region of £10,000 each year to keep these floral displays going. And that doesn't include any of the renewal projects that we have to do. We're very, very proud of the success that we've had for a small community to be recognised on a world stage against those countries, and for me to have the opportunity to stand up in front of 300 people from countries all around the world to talk about Usk, to talk about Monmouthshire and to talk about Wales was an incredible privilege in that regard. And we do so, I have a full-time job, to do so as volunteers on behalf of our community has been a tremendous achievement. So what I wanted to do was to thank Kath for putting that report together. Thank you, councillors, for approving the grant, those of you involved in those decisions. Can we do it again? I hope so. Paul Matthews was heavily involved in the presentation to the World in View at Bloom, and he has specifically said that the volunteer model that we use is one that he is looking to try and extend to other groups as well. It isn't just about banging the table as taxpayers and say, we want your money, please. It is about working together as a partnership. As Kath said, you know, we do get our hands dirty. We do litter pick. We do take the weeds out. We do paint the benches, etc. But we do so in cooperation and in collaboration with the Highways team, with Nigel Leeworthy's team, which is very much appreciated. So on that point, I've finished, and if anyone's got any questions, I'll be delighted to answer them.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the committee, can I congratulate you on your amazing achievement, putting us on the international stage. And there can be no doubt that that small investment has really brought fantastic returns, and it's great to hear that the numbers, visitor numbers, were up as well. And you know, we've discussed at this committee many times in the past year how we can support our local businesses, and I think you've really demonstrated how this does encourage people into Usk and into our county, and they don't just visit Usk, as you say, they go elsewhere too. So I'm sure members would like to ask some questions. Councillor Jones first.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Keir. I don't know where to start, really, as a local girl myself, and having witnessed the time and effort and pure hard work that Tony Keir and his team have put in over the last decades that I've lived here. I just want to say thank you. I think that's my first thing I want to say to you. You've made an environment which is wonderful for me to live in, and now my child. And I just think it's just such a lovely environment to live in now because of the hard work that you put in. It's a beautiful place to live. And I know the children that live here respect it an awful lot because of, and we don't see that much litter in the town centre. I know we pick up quite a lot, our group, but there's more respect for the area because of the efforts that you put in and the awards you've done and the work you're working alongside the school particularly, and the awareness with children of what you're doing. Your achievements are outstanding. The rebranding of Usk as Town of Flowers. I mean, it's had such a massive impact on tourism, not just for our town of Usk, but for Monmouthshire as a whole. The people coming in specifically to see that. Even in Wysham, which is my ward, they're constantly, knowing I'm from Usk, say that we visit Usk just to see the flowers, and it is so impressive and it's wonderful. And they then encourage family members from around Wales or further afield to come and see it as well. So it's just a continuous impact that you've had on people. And I think that the small amount of money that you asked for has come back in bucket loads in other ways. So thank you for that. And I would like to make a suggestion, Chair, that we make that an annual contribution, perhaps more even, because of the work that they're doing. It's proven that what we're getting back is far more significant than what tiny amount that we're putting in.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. And Councillor Easton and then Councillor Dimmock.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I was brought up just up the road from you, although I'm a councillor in Caldecott now. And I got a picture of me in Usk Council School many years ago. I remember Tuan Square when it was a thriving little bus terminus, where the clock wasn't where it is now. So I got to congratulate you on what you've done in Usk. I know Caldecott Town team are trying to emulate. It'll be a long way to emulate what Usk has done, but well done.
Thank you. Councillor Dimmock.
I would just like some points. If other villages, towns in the authority wanted to mimic what you're doing, what would your top 3 points be to start it?
It's putting me on the spot, isn't it? I think the first thing to say is, whilst I've been involved now for 7 years, and I go back to 7 years ago, the group was on the point of failure because there wasn't sufficient volunteers, there wasn't sufficient money, and indeed they hadn't realised they hadn't got enough money to pay for the flowers that year. We've been going, as I said, this is our 38th summer, so I can't sit here and take credit for all that. Obviously I can't. But what did I do? What would I recommend? It is absolutely about the community. That is the number one point. It is about having a shared goal about what do you want to do, how do you want to make a difference into the community, because that at the end of the day is how it all started 38 years ago. Some individuals, some of who you would know, some former town councillors and county councillors sat around a pub table and said, what difference can we make? And they came up with the idea of flowers. But of course, the flowers has then has moved on from that. So in the sense that the competitions that we enter give us the framework in which to do things. So community group 1, second thing, start off in a competition, one of which would be the smaller version, is what's called In Your Neighbourhood, which is a smaller version of the larger competition, and it gives you the framework to and ideas to put things in place. And then the third point is you've got to pay for it. Now, it isn't just about the hard cash, it is also about the volunteers, but also work in kind. We, for example, have been so supported by A. Jones & Co. in Usk, not because they give us any money, but they loan us their truck. Now, when you're shifting the large amounts of floral displays, whether the ones that we've planted up in the garden centre, or whether it's emptying the floral displays, years ago it was done with wheelbarrows and the back of people's cars. So it's gaining financial support in a non-financial way is another way as well. So it is about getting the community. If you can get everybody on board with an idea, get the structure in place and raise money, those would be the 3 points I would say to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from members? I'd like to bring in Councillor Strong at this point. Is there anything you'd like to say, Councillor Strong?
We're very proud of Usk and Bloom. It's been a fantastic year for us, and it's down to the hard work of the volunteers. There are, I think, as Tony said, about 30 people who are regular volunteers. They go out in all weathers to make sure that the town looks spick and span, and they are a credit to the town. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Strong. Councillor Harris.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm from Abergavenny, and we do our best, but obviously nowhere near like Usk. And it's obviously congratulations. You've got the secret of how to do it, and if we can rub some of that off onto Abergavenny, that will be good. So congratulations. But I've been asked by a member who's had to go to say, don't forget that Lambaddock Community Council contribute financially. She asked me to do that, so I've done it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps you can help me with a more technical question. We are interested in Monmouth in peat-free and bee-friendly type projects, and we found it very difficult to get a contractor that could deliver. Have you any experience of this area and demands from the community at all? Thank you.
Well, amazingly, I might be chair, but I'm afraid you're talking to the wrong person when it comes to flowers. What I would say is there's always peat-free, and there's always a balance, isn't there? Because whether we like it or not, peat is a better help to growing outstanding floral displays. And we have experimented with peat-free, so we do, kind of tick a box for competition purposes, but the floral responses aren't the same. Contractors, I haven't really explored because we're all volunteers in that regard, but there are groups within Monmouthshire, Bee-Friendly Monmouthshire, is it? Yeah. And those are the people that we've linked in with. And also there's some members of the Civic Society in Usk who are championing this type of work as well. But it's also liaising with the County Council itself. We've had tremendous support, particularly in the last 2 years, where we've built up the relationship with Nigel Leeworthy's team, and also linking into the County Council sustainability policies about grass cutting, those sorts of things. So, you would have seen, if you happen to notice, we used to cut all the grass areas on the way into Usk. We've left some of those. There are areas within the Owen Glyndŵr field opposite the Sessions House that were left as well. So it's all those sorts of things that you can do. And it is really, for me as somebody who was completely ignorant on these matters, it is, you know, seeing the opportunities and being bold and asking these people, can we come and talk to you, and to give us ideas. It is a challenge.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, brilliant. Well done. And next year and the year after, etc., I'm sure you'll be up at the top of the pile. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Roden. Councillor Jones, could you turn your...
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. Are there any other contributions from any members? I would just like to thank you for coming along and giving your time today, and I'm sorry that we kept you waiting. And I think, you know, we are stronger communities, and I think this epitomises everything that we want communities to be. And I just feel that it would be a terrible state of affairs in the future if, due to budget constraints, we weren't able to contribute to this type of initiative, which would be such a travesty, because obviously that very small amount of money has multiplied many, many times. And I really hope that, you know, we will be able to continue despite our budgetary constraints in that way. But thank you so much, and we're all extremely proud of your achievements. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kath. So we'll now move on to confirm the meeting, the minutes of the previous meeting. Do I have a copy of those? Thank you very much. So the last meeting was held on the 13th of September, and is everybody happy that I sign these minutes? Are there any corrections that need to be made, or any changes that members... Are you happy that I sign them as a true record? Can I have a proposer? Councillor Harris, and seconded by Councillor Easton. All in favour? Thank you. And if we can now look at the Stronger Communities Forward Work Programme. We've already had some suggestions this morning from Councillor Smith, and I very much hope that we can have the slavery and trafficking, which is something I feel passionately about. Can I...
The items that Councillor Smith suggested are in the pre-meeting, and they are pretty much mostly listed bar one and under the work programme items at the bottom. So it's a case of bringing them forward. But I do understand that Councillor Smith has asked us to review with Roger grounds maintenance and that service. So we will have some discussions about when we can programme that in. But for you to be aware, your next meeting in December, we've got some reports to bring to you on waste and recycling, and that's further to the scrutiny that you've undertaken already on this area. So that will be dedicated to that meeting. I think there'll be quite a big debate on that. Outside of the committee, the chair has requested that we have a look at modern slavery and human trafficking. So I've approached an officer who works for us currently, but also for Newport Council, to see if we can set up a discussion initially between her and the chair, and then with a view to sort of beginning some work on that. But that will be in the new year from now on. Something that I've been asked to raise to you by Carl Tewig, I think he might have mentioned it earlier, but basically, in view of the fact that we're scrutinising waste in our December meeting, which is the 6th, he's wondered whether Thursday the 29th of November would be a good opportunity for a site visit to an anaerobic digestion facility. So basically, there were several dates, but some of them have been ruled out with clashes with other meetings, and the Thursday the 29th appears to be free, but we're not sure how many members would be able to do that and whether it's too short notice for you. Sorry? November.
Thursday the 29th.
I may well be able to help with that, because this is the AD plant, which we are contracted with to take all of your food waste for the next 10, 15 years, I think it is. It's been supported by Welsh Government. They're funding 25% of the gate fee. I think it's particularly worth your while, because you are at the next meeting going to be discussing issues around the type of bags which we use. And this is very relevant to that. And so I would encourage you, if the date works for you, to take the opportunity to come and see what happens, how it works. You might need a nose peg occasionally because it can be a bit smelly, but nevertheless it's extremely interesting. Wow, that's a bit sad. It is interesting, but it will inform any future decisions you have around bags and their usage thereafter.
Thank you. I mean, it would be a full day from 9:30 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I personally feel we should go ahead with it with those that can, because we really need to have that contribution from those people who can go at the meeting. Councillor Harris.
Will it be open to any other member that can attend?
I mean, priority has to be given to members of this committee, but I think we'd welcome anybody else, wouldn't we?
I think, Madam Chairman, it's a frontline service to you. The more members which are familiar with what's happening can only help. Ultimately, it'll be back to yourselves to advise Cabinet and Council, but I think for members to become familiar with what's going on, the better. If we can manage it, we would also tie in with this a visit to a recycling processing plant, because when you meet in December, we'll also be talking about how we might be managing that in the future as well. So yeah, it is a full day, but it is a frontline service. Yeah, all of your residents use it, so it'd be useful.
Thank you. I mean, obviously, can I just have a show of hands on those who would be able to go? Okay, I think it's definitely something we can go ahead and we'll open it to all members. So I think it'll be extremely important visit, especially with the decisions we've got to make about bags. Okay, who's on CYP? Just two. Well, I think we still need to go ahead. I mean, because of the importance of seeing this facility before the next meeting. Okay, and as far as the speeding workshop that we all went to, can you just give us a very brief update on that, Roger?
Yeah, grateful for the opportunity. Some members went to a workshop which we ran at the Shire Hall to look at the process which has been developed through the Member Officer Speed Working Group, Road Safety Speed Working Group. We've done some work on that. We now need to do to finish that and finish formatting that procedure. It draws more responsibility on the authority to coordinate inquiries between the police, Go Safe and Monmouthshire. Nevertheless, members are very positive. They see that as being a extremely useful role, because at the moment inquiries come in from all sorts of places. And this will offer us the opportunity to manage those much better. So that has to go back once more to the steering group and then back to the strong community. So that is being put together now by way of the final process. It feels a little bit bureaucratic, but we need to go through this, because ultimately it'll be how you decide whether or not you are or are not going to go forward with a scheme. And you know yourselves, is one of the major issues which hits you from constituents. So that piece of work is to be done. I'll also, if I may, Madam Chairman, just take this opportunity to talk about a scheme which we have been made aware of in Gloucestershire, where they're linking ANPR cameras, the ones which read your number plate, with a speeding camera. So it starts to generate automatically correspondence if you are speeding, which takes out some of the problems which exist at the moment. it's a lot more complex than that. And I'd have to say it's only a test in Gloucestershire, but if it may well be that something which we would want members to look at as well.
I think that's a very exciting development, and I think we'll have to watch that space very, very carefully. Anything that can help reduce this terrible problem we have of speeding. So I think that we're all happy with the Forward Work Programme. The Cabinet and Council Forward Work Programme is there. I don't think it's necessary for us to go through that in detail now. Is there anything you want to add?
It's there for members to pick up any items in that might be going forward for decision that they would like to bring forward either to scrutiny or to request further information on. You're entitled to request information from any officer on any of those reports in advance of decisions being taken, or you could also raise it with the chair or myself if you wanted sight of any of those reports, but it's there for that purpose on the agenda.
Thank you. Roger.
I'm very sorry, Madam Chairman, and I was a bit slow off the mark, but the reason I stopped you was to just make reference to something in the minutes of the last meeting. In the minutes of the last meeting, it talks about head of operation to provide a full response at the next meeting, and that's in relation to a presentation done by Mr. Rogers, Altabella Road. Yeah. You remember that, about large vehicles in small lanes. It wasn't a report as such. I was going to give you a note back on what had taken place leading up to Mr. Rogers' presentation to yourself, because there had been a great deal of correspondence prior to that. The local member and myself had met with Mr. Rogers. We didn't go through this at the meeting because it was in the public forum, and there's no reason why this shouldn't be public, but it didn't work with your agenda at the time. Mr. Rogers had met with myself and a local member previously. We had taken a decision not to put any limits on that road. There was then correspondence through the complaints procedures, correspondence with Welsh Government, there's correspondence with our countryside staff as well, and the position remained the same. So I felt to give you a balanced picture, you needed to understand that. I will hope there is continuing to be correspondence on it, because I'm seeing emails today about the very same thing. And actually, I may have seen a solution come through today as well. But I felt it was important that I tell you that there was a background to it, that Mr. Rogers had worked with us up until when he'd come to yourself. I think, unfortunately, the response which was coming back wasn't suiting Mr. Rogers and his other residents. But
okay, thank you for that. And I think, obviously, if you could keep us updated, because there's a number of members that aren't here now. Councillor Roden.
Thank you, Jay. Carrying on that topic, if I may, just briefly. Manson Lane has had issues, probably in a similar vein. Part of the road collapsed there. Similar kinds of complaints, so I'd be very interested to hear the proposed solution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for mentioning that. So I think now we need to note the date and time of the next meeting, which is Thursday, the 6th of December at 10 o'clock. And prior to that, we look forward to seeing you at the visit to the recycling facilities on the 29th. And we will be downstairs because we're having some works done here. That's a very good point. Thank you. So thank you, everybody, for your contributions, for our officers for all their assistance, and the meeting is now closed.